Morning, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to the CAPitalst Cast, our second episode. Today I have Representative Don Keefer joining me, and we're going to talk about what's going on in the legislature. Don, you are in, your district is York County and a little bit of Cumberland County too, right?
Correct. So the entire northern part of York County, and then one municipality, which is Monroe Township, which is in Cumberland County.
Got it. So today we wanted to talk about the State House is going to have an audit or an investigation, I guess, into the what happened during the election. Can you tell us a little bit about what the focus is going to be and just kind of how that's set up?
Sure. So we called for an audit of the system in the process. We have been inundated. If any legislator says that they haven't received calls or emails about this, they're not being honest. We have received an overwhelming number of calls, emails, text messages, you name it, social media contacts, upset about the process. So whether it was that they couldn't vote on a regular ballot, a provisional ballot, they couldn't watch the election returns, or the return numbers didn't match, whatever it may be, it was overwhelming. So I think us as a General Assembly member, we have an obligation to make sure that that process and that system was not compromised and there are not issues that need to be addressed, which we know there are, because we hadn't touched the election code for years, decades. We hadn't touched it. And then we did make some changes to it in 2019. And we audited the process back in the primary, the first election where that really would have taken effect. And we never addressed, while we came up with legislation to address some of it, they never got addressed. That legislation never passed.
Yeah, the legislation actually, if I'm not mistaken, went out of the House and into the Senate, and the Senate just didn't do anything with it between the primary and the general election. It just sat in committee, essentially.
That's correct. So it was this. The Senate believed that, first of all, that it would have caused issues with a legal challenge they had pending in the courts, was their one issue. And the other issue was that they couldn't reach a negotiation with the governor. So they thought that it would not be, why bother if the governor is going to veto it anyway, which he had told them he would. I personally, my opinion is you pass it. You put it on the governor's plate, and, you have done your part as a legislator.
Let's back up just a little bit.
Okay.
So we had the 2019, you guys had made some reforms to what the election process would look like. Can you walk us through what those reforms were and what those original changes were?
So the 2019 changes that were made were, there was this pitch that was made about doing no excuse absentee ballots, right? And that sounded reasonable. Why should people have to lie about why they were getting an absentee ballot? So this would allow you to apply for that process. And then I guess there was some deal struck that then in return, we were also going to remove the straight party ballot, right? So, and that sounded reasonable, right? So go down and make people consciously choose, so they're not just like, red or blue, what are we doing? And those were two of the big things. But unfortunately, with the mail-in ballot, which it turned out to be just flat out mail-in ballot, there were no guide rails that were in there. And so counties were interpreting it however they want it, and which we had seen. And so come forward now, right? So the first time that these laws would have been in place, we are now dealing with, so first it was in the primary, we were dealing with drop boxes, right? So these were boxes that counties would set up and that you could turn in your ballot. But the problem was there was no, first of all, the legislation does not allow for drop boxes. There's nothing in our legislation that provides for drop boxes, but the counties said, oh yes, we can do this. They believed they could, and they just did it. In fact, Philadelphia had a car, it was called like a motor voter car that would drive around and pick up ballots. And it was determined, they were saying they had the legal authority to do it, and the courts agreed with them. They could do it because they could consider that a satellite office, and that's what the court said. Drop boxes are satellite offices. Well, if that's the case, then that satellite office should be manned, right? An office is, a satellite of the election office. A box is not an office. So that was a huge issue. We don't have, it gets into one other issue. I'm sorry, I'm belaboring this, but it gets into vote harvesting, right? Or ballot harvesting. And ballot harvesting is not legal in Pennsylvania. Ballot harvesting is when you go out and you pick up 5 or 6 ballots from your friends or neighbors and you turn those in. That is not legally allowed in Pennsylvania, but these drop boxes essentially allowed for that to happen.
Yeah, because you don't actually have someone there in order to watch who is dropping the ballots into the drop box. So you can have someone come up and drop 25, 30, 100 ballots into the box at one time. So even though they're not legally allowed to do that, because there's no supervision, that's in essence what ends up happening.
So who's checking that? So there's got to be some kind of security in place that we're, monitoring the process. We do it with everything else.
Okay. Well, I mean, that makes sense. And the legislation that you guys passed, that the House passed, was done in what month?
So the final legislation, HB 2626, that we passed allowed for, so we articulated what the requirements and security measures that were in place for drop boxes. Since the courts determined them to be satellite offices, our compromise was, okay, so the drop boxes are there, but they have to be, I think there was video that had to be on those. There had to be somebody watching them so that you were determining that one person was putting one ballot into that drop box. And so that those measures were in place. The law also provided for, which was a compromise on our part, was 3 days of pre-canvassing. And pre-canvassing is when the counties receive your mail-in ballot, they can open the outer envelope and they can scan it all in, and they can flatten the ballot, prepare it to be scanned in, which is a pretty lengthy process for some counties if you have a very large county. So it provided 3 additional pre-canvassing days for that. And it also had, there was some more tightening of the rules with there, but those were the big things, the pre-canvassing and the ballot boxes. Everything else was spelled out that they took to the courts to have them interpret. And quite frankly, our Supreme Court wrote statute allowing for 3 days post-election to receive ballots. That wasn't addressed in there because it was already addressed in our current law saying ballots can be accepted by this date and time. Done.
Yeah. So all of these reforms, they sat in the Senate. Some of those things sound like they would have addressed some of the concerns that people have, post-election.
Right.
And now, post-election, we have the results that had happened. We also had the night of the election, going into the election, the Pennsylvania Secretary of State made a few pronouncements that essentially she didn't have the authority to make.
Right. And this was what was going on, what we found out. And again, why I think we need to investigate the entire process of how our elections were facilitated. If nothing else, right, let's just say nothing nefarious took place and there was no compromises, right? What took place that provided obstacles or disenfranchised voters, or, you want to talk about voter suppression, right? There are instances where that occurred. So we should take a look at that and fix that. But she was making rules and changes up to and including the day of the election. And so at one point she made a decision that said, oh, you can now go 3 days beyond the 3 days that the Supreme Court gave you to accept mail-in ballots. And fortunately, Justice Alito came down and said, no, you don't have that authority to do that. You may not, allow departments to do it. My question is, how many already did it? How many just never sequestered those, just counted them in? I don't know that, we have a way of capturing how that was legitimately done. And maybe there is a way, but, I think we need to get to the bottom of how that was done. There was also, here's a big issue that I found was that there's a thing called curing the ballot. So curing a ballot is allowing a deficient ballot, a ballot that's not been completed properly, allowing that voter the opportunity to come in and correct the ballot, whether they're missing a signature or the security envelope, whatever it may be. And we learned that there were 7 counties that gave voters the opportunity to cure their ballots. The other 60 counties did not have the same opportunity to do that. Is that constitutionally, you are all constitutionally guaranteed equitable access to the ballot. And I think that that was an inequitable opportunity that was there. Additionally, there was another guidance that came down saying that the counties, if requested, needed to provide a list of those deficient ballots to third-party groups. Let's say the Republican Party or the Democrat Party. They were required to provide them a list of those deficient ballots so that they could contact those voters to cure the ballots. I mean, I definitely think that goes above and beyond, but part of what we've done with our investigation with the state government committee is we want every rule and guideline that was changed, and we want a timeline of each and every one of those changes so that we can demonstrate, in my opinion, and this is purely my opinion, this was orchestrated chaos by the Department of State and the administration. I mean, the ever-changing rules that counties could not possibly keep up with. There's no way they could even educate their judge of elections and their poll workers appropriately to facilitate elections with the way the rules were coming down and the guidelines were coming down, the changes that were being made.
Yeah, and whether they intended it to be as disorganized as what it ended up being, or that was just kind of a byproduct of, the people who we have. The Wolf administration has just done a terrible job in administrating pretty much every one of the executive programs that they've put out there. Whether we're talking about waivers for businesses to operate during the COVID crisis, or in this case within the elections, it's just been one disaster after another.
Right. And the gaslighting of the media, that as if, oh no, this is great, this is wonderful, everything is fine, this governor's done a great job. I mean, I think WGAL wrote an opinion piece that said, Secretary Levine, or Dr. Rachel Levine, she was a steady hand on the wheel that we needed. Really? She was making opinions and decisions based on her feelings. Well, I have a gut feeling that this is not good, so we're going to act in this manner. Not in data, not in actual, criteria, and that's how they said they were going to make all their decisions. But nobody can look at anything and everything is great. I mean, this is a complete fabrication that the media is trying to pull off on people in general, and everybody should be suspicious.
Yeah, and it's interesting just how, and particularly with the election, the fact that you have various media outlets kind of cheerleading these last minute executive decisions. The problem that we run into is, and one of the things that nobody really ever thinks about, is what happens when a person you don't like has that authority to make those kind of decisions.
Absolutely. And listen, this is not a partisan issue. Both sides are to blame here. I mean, we are so guilty of this as legislators. And I say this all the time. We punt to the executive. We don't take the personal responsibility to articulate these laws very specifically, very narrowly, so that we are setting the rules and guidelines. We allow the administration to do this. And then, then we cry, oh, look what they did. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. It sounds like you have a helper there.
Yeah, my mastiff is very disgruntled right now. Hold on 1 second. Sorry.
No worries.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. That's live broadcasting. Believe
there you go.
That's just kind of the way that it goes. So we have, so you're looking to get a kind of a timeline from the Department of State about what changes they made, how they made the changes, how that was distributed to the various county boards of elections. What else is going into this investigation that you guys are looking at?
So we were trying to pull everything and every issue that somebody brought to us to see, like, is that a procedural, or is that a process issue, or is that something that needs to be, investigated on a criminal side of things? So we're trying to keep this two clear lines, right? So if it's something regarding you think it's voter fraud, election fraud, that we're trying to steer them towards the courts, right? That would have to go through that process. But anything that's, in the legislative realm, we're trying to capture that. So let's talk. Some counties used a third-party mail house to mail out ballots.
Right.
And so we received some of these companies contact us, or workers and owners, and have said, well, when we would get this data to process and to send out these ballots, it was a little suspicious that we would get, say, I'll just use my name. We got, 15 Keefers. We were mailing out 15 ballots to 15 people with the last name Keefer at one address.
Yeah.
So I think, let's look at that process. What's in the software currently that captures something like that? Also, voter ID. I'm sorry, this has got to be number one. We require an ID for everything. If you want to get welfare, you want to get insurance, you want to go fly on a plane, whatever it is, you need an ID. Why is it so such a monumental, disservice to ask for an identification? I don't know, but that would be part of it. They do an electronic voter book with Florida, right? You swipe your license or your walker's ID, whatever your state issue ID is, and boom, that connects to you. It's coded, so your ballot is still secret and secure, which is your constitutional right to have a secret ballot. But it speeds up the process. Number one, we could get a lot more people through the thing. They're not worrying about signatures, right? Because it would be connected to that ID, and we make sure that you're the person. We can look at your face and see who you are. Why is that so difficult?
Yeah, and we're actually one of the only advanced countries to not have a voter ID. I mean, Mexico has, voter ID requirements if you're going to vote in their election.
Right. So that was one of the other things that we could definitely do that. We also need to look at the process. So I can tell you, York County, the county will send to the judge of elections, right? They send to them the locked boxes, the locked bags, the equipment, everything is there, right? And it's all has these locks that get broken off when you start operations that day. Okay, so that's your level of security there. And then when you return those items, right, they're all in these bags, so that once the lock is on that bag, you can't get it back off. And I know that because there was an issue one time. They're like, oh, we must have got the wrong locks on the wrong bags because one, didn't fit. And then you got to return all this, right? So that, let's say in my district, Fairview 4 got, they were delivered 3 bags, this many ballots, this many locks, all that, right? And that is checked in, and okay, I received everything back to them. How are counties, for example, in Berks County, found a USB stick? I think it was a USB stick, or maybe it was a CFR cartridge, whatever they have, with more votes. It was like 1,400 additional votes. How did you not know those were missing?
Yeah.
So I want to bring those counties in. You tell me what the process is, and then you tell me what occurred that you could still be finding. Oh, looky, on the floorboard of this car, we found a USB stick floating. How does that even happen?
Yeah, it's a challenge because, any process where you have this many different offices, you have the 67 counties, you have all of the state, you have just so many hands, so many cooks in the kitchen, as it were. You are really kind of guaranteed for there to be some errors, but what are the things that are in place in order to, and looking at what are the things that are in place in order to minimize those errors, in order to make it as hard as possible to mess things up, is really an important thing to take a look at. So when you guys passed the legislation kind of calling for the investigation, I'm assuming that was not a bipartisan vote, that everybody, how did that vote breakdown look?
It was right along party lines, right? No, I shouldn't say that. That is not true. So the audit part of it, because that's the only thing we had to vote on legislatively. As far as our speaker, Cutler, assigned the investigation over to the the state government committee. So we can look into it. We can conduct hearings and look into elections. And we're going to continue to do that well into 2021. But we had to vote on the audit. So the audit was saying we're charging the Legislative Budget and Finance Committee with a risk limiting audit. And it's a little bit broader, a lot broader than the scope that we did in the spring. We did this after our primary as well. And so it goes into those processes on how they're uploading the data, the pre-canvassing, did the return numbers, how they audit the actual votes themselves from the precinct level. So that was done legislatively. In the committee, of course, it's straight party lines and attempting to make it, some big atrocity. How dare us question? This is an assault and attack on democracy. Listen, how long did we do the Russia collusion thing with absolutely no evidence, right? Except for a fabricated dossier. And we went through that for 3 years. So to say that, questioning this is, undermining democracy is just such a cry of, it is, what is it? Political theater. Okay. Let's use their term. So at any rate, that passed. 3 Dems did support us on that bill.
Well, and I mean, it really, so we, as you had mentioned, when we first got started, we had a pretty significant change to our voting process that went through in 2019 as far as allowing people to request absentee ballots, with, just no excuse requests. We went through and had the primary election, and going into the primary election, the governor basically decertified every voting machine in the state.
Commonwealth, yeah.
So the counties had to go out and purchase all new voting machines. And so we had one major change that happened legislatively. We had another major change that happened administratively, for lack of a better term. And we now have a pandemic, and Pennsylvania had received more mail-in ballots than it's ever received in the history of the state. So the idea that we don't need to take a closer look at what happened, that we don't need to really take a look at the process is just kind of, it's.
So, and let me add to that. So on top of this, counties rolled out their new equipment and their new processes. It was staggered. Everybody didn't roll it out at the same time because the governor kept changing the deadline in which that had. So the deadline was, I think this primaries was like everything was done like the 2019, you could no longer use any old equipment if you were doing that. So 2020, it would have to have been put in place, right? Now, most counties rolled it out in 2019. I think maybe some did it in the spring of 2019. Some did it in the fall. I know York County did it in the fall. And so let me go to that. When Philadelphia rolled theirs out, it was such a they had so many issues. It was overwhelming. And at that point in time, Democrat Chris Rabb, who happens to be a Democratic ward leader in the 9th Ward, he called for the decertification of this new equipment they put in place and wanted an investigation of it because of all the issues that they were having, how it was tabulating, how it was not secure. There were many issues that he addressed. Northampton County has the exact same computer equipment, and their election director had advocated for that equipment. She was the biggest champion of that equipment. And when their election was finished, it was York County and Northampton County in the fall of 2019. I think we were in a competition of who had a bigger train wreck than the other because they were atrocious. And that election director she said, I am now so apprehensive about this system because of the compromises. I can now see how the system can easily be compromised and in a way that might even go undetected. But there's nothing I can do because we spent millions of dollars on this equipment and we can't go back and turn it back in. So their issues were there before, but now it's like, oh, nothing to see here.
Yeah, and it's really, it's unfortunate that it's just become such a partisan issue just to really want to figure out, figure out what happened and what changes need to be, made in order to ensure that in the future things go more smoothly, that people do have a better understanding of how the process is working, and that they can have confidence in the fact that the process is working.
Right.
So what's
you have better confidence, right? I don't care who you are. If people start thinking that there's always a thumb on the scale, right? My vote doesn't matter anyway. And this is what the press always says. Oh, this is voter suppression because people feel like they are blocked out of the system and it's rigged and that their vote doesn't matter, right? This perpetuates that. And so we need voter buy-in. And what is the harm of us demonstrating here's how it happened, whatever happened, right? And then let's correct it going forward. Maybe we find that, you know what, it was a couple human error here or there, but it was nothing that was systemic. Why not demonstrate that and get buy-in? And if you have that buy-in, I think you would have people, regardless of the results, at least would feel that it was equitable. You know what? We lost, but we saw what happened. Because there are so many conspiracy theories out there with social media that, I even debunk. I'm like, well, listen, that sounds like really that's a real atrocity that happened. Unfortunately, we don't even use that system in Pennsylvania, right?
Yeah. So you said that the hearings and the reforms, or the hearings and kind of the audit and investigation that you guys will be doing is going to be ongoing. Is there any kind of timeline as to when voters, when folks can expect everything to be wrapped up, or is it just kind of open?
So unfortunately, the audit, we will initiate the audit right away, and but we won't have a complete report until February.
Okay.
Unfortunately, but we plan to, as soon as we get, because we're pumpkins, right? As of the 30th of this month, we're done. We are no longer until we're sworn in, and we don't get sworn in until the first Tuesday of January. But we are lining everything up, so we're doing our homework. We will have a preliminary report today. The state government committee will. So this is all the questions that we've been accumulating, the information that we have been able to gather to date. All that will be in this preliminary report, and we will be using that to move forward with our investigations and our hearings. And we will be pulling people in. Right now, we couldn't even pull in the Secretary of State and a lot of those staffers because they're all wrapped up in litigation, so they couldn't be brought in before our committee to testify. So that's a hurdle as well. So you will start seeing more things come out in January when we get sworn back in and we start scheduling some of these hearings with the groups that we can. But we have sent letters out to the Department of State and to the counties. I think they're about 3 pages long worth of questions that we have and information we have asked them to provide us with.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you taking some time this morning. I know that you guys are, even though you do, as you said, turn into pumpkins at the end of the month, I know you have a lot on your plate.
Absolutely.
And we'll definitely be looking forward to seeing what actually is in the report, the preliminary report that you released today. And also, I know I'll be following the investigation closely, just because it's important to know, what you find and what changes need to be made, and just how the system can be improved.
Right.
So again, Representative Dawn Keefer, thank you very much for joining us this morning. I appreciate it, and I know that our viewers appreciate it as well.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.